Hello and welcome to Legal Lens. Start with former Honorable Chief Justice of India Court, Mr. Venkat Charayaji. Justice is the crowning glory and the sovereign virtue of democracy. As you read in pinned, a new verdict given by Honorable Supreme Court Justice P.K. Mishraji and Honorable N.V. Anjariyaji. In that is a registered sale deed is presumed valid. Minor discrepancies in attesting witness details do not invalidate the execution or we can say justice after decade. Supreme Court ends Haridwar land dispute. The judgment is given on 23rd June of 2026 and the case name is Sarafat Ali versus Deputy Director of Consolidation Haridwar and others. Let us now examine the fact of this case. The sale deed in question was executed on June 4th, 1959, at which time the purchaser claimed both ownership and possession. Furthermore, they applied for mutation to effect a change in the official records. However, the Consolidation Authority at that time rejected the claim. Subsequently, this matter was brought before the High Court, and even after the being presented there, the High Court also upheld the claim. What was the rationale for this? The reason in this case was straightforward. The execution of the sale deed was deemed dubious. Why was this so? Because in the original description by the witness in the sale deed, he was identified as Baru, resident of Nehantpur, Sudhari. However, when he testified in court decades later after 38 years, he described himself as Baru, son of Nathu, resident of Nasirpur Kalan. When he testified, the court concluded that the accounts differed. There was a different address, thus the sale deed was not validated. Aggrieved by this, an appeal was made to the Honorable Supreme Court. Thus, the matter reached the Supreme Court. But before the judgment, a question arises. What element make a sale deed valid? In other words, we can validate a sale deed. We check whether the parties are competent, whether lawful consideration is given, transfer of ownership and registration were required. In short, once the amount is paid and registered, it is complete. However, registration is not explicitly mandated. Attestation is not required to validate a sale deed. The difference is this: execution occurs when the parties A and B sign the documents making it fully executed. Attestation, however, happens when a witness such as C and D observe the executants signing. Once the witnesses confirm they saw the executants sign and they sign themselves, the deed is attested. There is a distinction between execution and attestation, but attestation is not required to validate a sale deed. The Supreme Court held that since the sale deed was registered, it raised a strong presumption of its validity and genuineness. Thus, if registered attestation is not essential, minor errors do not overturn this presumption, as human memory naturally fades over decades unless there is a proof of fraud, forgery or coercion. If there is evidence the situation is differed, the situation is different. However, if only minor inconsistency error exist, the strong presumption remained intact. The court stated that registered sale deed should not be doubted solely because a witness provide alternate or incorrect testimony about the address. Neither the lower court nor the Honorable High Court can discredit the registered sale deed on that basis. In this case, the Honorable Supreme Court allowed the appeal. A key issue discussed was the distinction between void and voidable. Additionally, the authorities contended that the transfer violated Section 154 of the UP Jamindari Abolition and Land Reforms Act. The question before the court was whether this violation, as alleged, would automatically render the sale deed void. The Supreme Court answered in the negative. The Supreme Court held that under the Act and the relevant section, the transfer was merely voidable, not automatically void. In other words, the transfer remained valid unless and until it was challenged and set aside by a competent court. Therefore, the section did not provide that the transfer would be void automatically. Instead, it was voidable and the document was executed as such and remained valid in voidable case until another party challenged it or a competent court set it aside. This was a critical observation and was the primary basis for allowing the appeal in this case. The court further explained that there is a substantial distinction between void and voidable. A void transfer has no legal effects whatsoever and can be ignored by anyone. In contrast, a voidable transfer is a valid until it is personally rescinded or set aside by a court. This distinction was a key factor in allowing the appeal. The court explicitly found that Section 154 of the UP Jamindari Abolition Act was not violated. It did not declare the transfer void but voidable. The court emphasized that this distinction was crucial and reiterated in numerous judgments that a registered sale deed is not automatically presumed valid or genuine. Minor discrepancies do not destroy this presumption. In conclusion, the court disposed of the case. So, the court held that a registered sale deed carries a strong presumption of validity and genuineness. Attestation is not a statutory requirement for establishing the validity of the sale. Minor errors or inconsistencies in the attesting witness testimony do not invalidate the execution. If the attesting witness provides differing testimony, this does not render the execution void. The burden of rebutting this presumption lies on that party relying on it. The court made it clear that while void documents may be disregarded, voidable documents remain effective. They retain validity until set aside by a court or challenged. These findings constitute the conclusion of the case. That means justice delayed is justice denied. The Honorable Supreme Court decision is not only a relief to one family but also a reaffirmation of the rule of law. It establishes that India's path to becoming a truly developed state must rest on secure property rights, effective institutions, and the guarantee that justice will not take generation to be realized. Thank you.